The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the marble floor. Not because I was clumsy, because my new daughter-in-law just pointed at me, laughed, and said, "This is the burden we're stuck with now." Her name is Julia Bradford. And until that moment I thought we were strangers politely tolerating each other. Turns out, she had rehearsed that line in front of 200 guests, her father included. And the moment those words hit the air, the entire reception went silent. My name is Helen Carter. I'm 61 years old, a retired widow from a quiet coastal town in Maine. And until today, I was known simply as Daniel's mother. But now, as her father, Douglas Bradford, CEO of Bradford Technologies, turned ghost pale at the sound of my name, that title was about to change. Let me take you back to how we got here. Because trust me, what happened next changed everything. I'd only met Julia twice before the wedding. Once over dinner at a steakhouse, where she spent more time glancing at my earrings than listening to anything I said. And once at their engagement party, where she asked me if I had someone helping with bills now that I'm older. I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. Daniel met her through work. He's 33, works in business development, and lives in Boston. I raised him alone after his father passed in 2005. It was always just the two of us. The wedding was lavish, no surprise. The Bradfords hosted it at their family estate in Westport, Connecticut. Picture 10 acres of rose gardens, a private chapel, string quartets in every corner, and staff wearing earpieces. I wore a soft gray dress with a pearl brooch my mother left me. Nothing flashy, just enough to be respectfully invisible. I chose that look on purpose, because I've spent the last 16 years building a life most people wouldn't believe if they saw it on paper. And I learned early that people treat you differently when they think you have nothing. Julia approached me during the reception with her parents flanking her like royalty. Her tone was sweet, her expression was not. "Dad, Mom. This is Daniel's mother." Then she tilted her head slightly and added, with a smile that could cut glass, "This is the burden we're stuck with now." I barely had time to register the sting before Douglas Bradford looked at me, and his entire posture changed. His hand froze halfway to his champagne. His eyes widened. "Helen Carter?" he said, as if he'd seen a ghost. "From the East Bay merger back in 2020? Suddenly the air was different. Guests were whispering. Julia blinked in confusion. You're that Helen Carter?" I smiled softly like I had no idea what he meant. "I'm just Daniel's mother," I said. "But the truth? I was also the anonymous investor who bought 42% of Bradford Technologies through a shell firm 5 years ago, saving it from collapse when Douglas nearly bankrupted it, with an expansion plan that didn't work. I never planned for him to find out. I certainly didn't expect it to happen at my son's wedding. But there we were. Let me explain. Back in the early 2000s, my late husband and I were both engineers. He developed a compact hardware component that extended battery life in commercial GPS systems. It seemed small, but it changed everything. We sold the patent in 2008 for $18 million. Daniel was still in college. We told him we'd received a modest settlement from a workplace lawsuit. Nothing dramatic. He never asked questions. That money was just the beginning. I spent the next 12 years learning how to invest. Stocks, real estate, small companies. I made mistakes at first, but I kept learning. When my husband passed in 2005, I turned grief into strategy. I hired quiet advisors. Read everything. Watched markets. Grew what we had. By 2019, my net worth crossed $400 million. No one knew. And in 2020, when Bradford Technologies shares were tumbling, I stepped in through a private acquisition group. Douglas thought he was selling to an institutional partner. He never looked twice at the boardroom. I was there, in a navy blue blazer, quiet, watching, letting the lawyers do the talking. He didn't recognize me then, but he remembered something today. After Julia's comment, I quietly excused myself, said I needed air. Truthfully, I needed to figure out what to do next. My son was dancing with his new wife. He had no idea that her family was now realizing they were tied to a woman they dismissed as the burden. I found a bench near the fountain, and for the first time in a long time I let myself feel it, everything. The weight of years spent hiding in plain sight. The irony of having more money than most small towns, and still being looked down on by people who judged me by the shoes I wore. But this wasn't the end of the story, because the moment Douglas Bradford made that connection, the entire power dynamic shifted. He no longer saw me as Daniel's modest little mother. He saw me as the woman who bailed out his company, quietly, strategically, permanently. And based on the panic I saw in Julia's eyes, she knew something too. Maybe not everything, but enough to realize she'd just stepped on a landmine. The next morning my phone buzzed at 7:14 a.m. "Helen, we need to talk." It was Daniel. "Julia's dad pulled me aside last night," he said. "He started asking questions about Dad's old patents, about our finances." "Mom, why would he do that?" I didn't answer right away. Daniel paced the floor of my kitchen like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. "I don't understand what's going on," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Julia said her dad's been digging through old acquisition records. He's acting like you're some kind of investor? Is that even possible?" I set a cup of tea in front of him. Chamomile. The same blend I used to make when he couldn't sleep as a boy. "Sit down," I said gently. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." He stared at me like he just realized I was a stranger. "Is this about Dad's patent?" I nodded. "And everything that came after." I told him the truth. Not the version I'd polished for years. The real story. How after your father passed, I didn't just survive. I built. I told him about the investment firm I started behind the scenes. About the slow, deliberate way I grew our savings. About the advisors, the meetings, the long hours spent learning everything I could about the financial world. And yes, I told him that I was the person behind the acquisition of Bradford Technologies. I kept my voice calm. I didn't justify. I didn't apologize. Daniel didn't say a word for almost 5 minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "So, all those years I thought you were just getting by. And you were out there buying companies?" I nodded. "Not out of ego. Not to show off. To stay independent. To protect you." He sank into the chair, staring at the steam rising from his cup. "And Julia?" he asked. "What does she know?" I hesitated. "She suspects. Her father recognized me. That's why he's asking questions. Julia's smart. She'll put it together." Daniel exhaled slowly, running his hands through his hair. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "Because I wanted you to build your life without shortcuts. And you did. You've worked hard. You've earned your success. I didn't want to take that from you." He leaned back, absorbing everything. Then his phone buzzed. It was Julia. I didn't hear their conversation, but I saw the shift in his posture, the tension in his shoulders. The clipped way he said, "I'll ask her," before hanging up. "She wants to have lunch," he said. "With you." I nodded. "Let's go." The restaurant Julia chose wasn't just expensive. It was curated, designed to impress. The kind of place where the chairs were velvet and the wine list came on an iPad. She was already there when we arrived, seated at a corner table manicured to perfection, sipping from a glass of something that cost more than my first car. "Margaret," she said brightly, standing to greet me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't touch her eyes. "Thank you for coming." She glanced at Daniel, who sat beside me, silent. "I thought we could have a little family chat." I smiled. "Of course." We ordered lunch, sea bass for her, salad for me, steak for Daniel. None of us touched the bread. Then Julia leaned in. "So, my father mentioned something interesting after the wedding," she said. "He recognized you. Said you were part of a buyout deal a few years ago." I tilted my head slightly. "Did he?" "He did," she said. "And it got me thinking. About investment firms. Shell companies. That sort of thing." She was smiling, but it wasn't warm. It was strategic. Then she pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. On the screen, a grainy photo from a business journal. A boardroom meeting. A group of executives. And there, barely visible in the background, a woman in a navy blazer. "You look a lot like her," Julia said. I picked up the phone, studied the photo, then handed it back. "People say I have one of those faces." Daniel shifted beside me. "Julia," he said, "what are you trying to say?" She ignored him. "I just think it's fascinating," she said. That a woman who's supposedly living on a small pension owns a dress exactly like the one worn by the person who signed an $80 million acquisition deal. I smiled, soft and steady. Coincidences are funny that way. But Julia didn't laugh. By the time dessert was offered, she hadn't touched her food. Her tone had changed. I just think, she said carefully, if there's something more to your financial situation, we deserve to know. For planning purposes. I raised an eyebrow. Planning? For the future, she said quickly. Daniel and I are partners now. We need to understand our full family picture. I sipped my water. You mean you need to know if I'm useful to you financially? Her face didn't even flinch. Daniel stood up abruptly. We're done here. I followed. Back at my apartment, he sat in silence. I didn't want to believe it, he finally said. But she was digging. I nodded. She'll keep digging. He looked at me, his expression heavy with something between guilt and grief. What should we do? I walked to the desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside, a full financial analysis of the Bradford family's holdings. I'd ordered it weeks ago, after Julia's first comment about my expenses. I handed it to him. He flipped through the pages, and the color drained from his face. Mom, their company's in trouble again. I nodded. And this time they might think you're their solution. 3 days later, Julia showed up unannounced. Not at the front door. In my office. She didn't even try to hide her surprise when the receptionist said, Mrs. Carter will see you now. My workspace was modest by design. Tucked inside a quiet commercial building downtown. Just a private floor, neutral tones, a single plaque with the name Carter and Partners Advisory. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to keep me invisible. But today, that illusion was slipping. Julia walked in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore a crisp white blouse, navy skirt, and a look of determination. I didn't know you still worked, she said, glancing around. I like to keep busy, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. She didn't sit. Are you going to tell me the truth? I folded my hands. About what? Her eyes narrowed. About the company. About the money. About who you really are. There it was. I stood, walked to the filing cabinet, and pulled out a thin folder. I handed it to her. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement. If you want real answers, you sign this first. She blinked. Excuse me. No leaks. No manipulation. No involvement of your father. You want the truth? You earn it. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, without a word, she signed. I took the folder back and told her everything. For 30 minutes, Julia didn't interrupt. I explained how I invested in her father's company, how I rebuilt it from the inside out, how I allowed the family to keep their name and position, for appearances, but that the controlling shares belonged to me. When I finished, I leaned back and waited. Her face was pale. So, she said slowly, you own my father's company. I own the controlling interest. You've been sitting on this for years? I nodded. And you let me. She stopped herself, then laughed once bitterly. You let me call you a burden. I tilted my head. I let people reveal who they are before I reveal who I am. She looked like she might throw the folder, but she didn't. Instead, she stood. What do you want? I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. From us. From Daniel. From this family. I looked her in the eyes. Respect. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. So she left. No goodbyes. No threats. Just silence. That night Daniel called me. I think something happened, he said. Julia's been pacing all evening. She's not talking. I didn't respond. Did you meet with her? He asked. I did. And I told her the truth. There was a long pause. She's not the same, he said finally. Not since the wedding. Something's different. Maybe she's realizing she can't pretend anymore. Daniel sighed. I don't know what to do. I did. The next morning, I met with my estate attorney. Are we making changes? She asked, flipping open her notepad. Yes, I said. But quietly. Over the next 2 hours, we rewrote the terms of my trust. Nothing drastic. Just a few key adjustments. All disbursements to Daniel would remain intact. Julia would receive nothing, unless she qualified under a very specific clause. In cases where the trustee determines demonstrable good faith, care, and contribution to the beneficiary's well-being. It was subtle, but clear. I also added one more detail. If any member of the Bradford family attempted to access, control, or influence the trust directly, their rights would be revoked. My lawyer nodded as she signed. "You think she'll test it?" she asked. "I'm counting on it." 2 days later, I received a dinner invitation from Douglas Bradford. It was hand-delivered. Thick ivory cardstock. Gold trim. Elegant. Calculated. He wanted to meet privately. Said he admired my discretion and wished to discuss potential synergies. Translation: he was losing control and knew it. I declined the invitation. Politely. But I knew it wouldn't end there. That weekend, Daniel and Julia came to visit. They brought flowers, a cake, smiles, but it was all too polished, too rehearsed. We sat in the living room making small talk. Julia complimented my furniture. Daniel asked about my health. Then she brought it up. "Your trust," she said casually. "It's quite generous from what Daniel tells me." I didn't flinch. She continued. "I just hope you're thinking long-term. About legacy, family, security." I sipped my tea. "And I hope," I said, "you understand that trust is about more than money." Her eyes hardened for a split second, but then she smiled again. "Of course." Daniel didn't speak. He just stared at the floor. That night, after they left, I found the wine glass Julia had used still sitting on the counter. Next to it, a folded paper napkin. On it, written in small, elegant handwriting, "Everyone has a price. Even you." I burned the note in the sink. Then I went upstairs, opened my safe, and removed the document Julia didn't know existed. The secondary ownership agreement. The clause that gave me the power to dissolve the Bradford board. And with that, everything shifted again. Because now I wasn't just protecting my son. I was preparing for war. The Bradford family thought they controlled the narrative. They didn't know I'd already rewritten it. After Julia's veiled threat, I gave my attorney the green light. Within 48 hours, 3 key board members at Bradford Technologies received certified letters. Notice of special review. Emergency audit authorization. Notification of potential leadership restructuring under Clause 7C. Clause 7C. The one that triggers if the company's reputation or financial interests are at risk due to internal interference. I wrote it myself 3 years ago, and now it was active. On Monday morning, I walked into the Bradford Technologies boardroom, not as a guest, not as a silent investor, but as the chair of the review committee. Douglas Bradford was already seated. His son Mark, the CFO, stood stiffly behind him. Julia wasn't there, but her absence was its own message. "Helen," Douglas said, trying to sound cordial, "this is unexpected." "Is it?" I asked, placing my folder on the table. "You sent me an invitation, remember? This is my reply." He didn't speak. The rest of the board filed in. Some looked nervous. Some looked curious. 1 or 2 already suspected what was happening. I waited until the room settled. Then I spoke. 3 years ago, I purchased a controlling interest in this company. At the time, I chose discretion, to allow operations to continue uninterrupted, and to protect the Bradford name. Douglas stared at me, his jaw tight. Since then, the company has recovered. Revenues are up. Debt is down. But now that stability is at risk again. Mark leaned forward. "With respect, risk is a normal part of business. Not when it's driven by personal greed." I cut in. I turned to the projection screen. Clicked the remote. Slide 1. A timeline of Julia Bradford's known associations with media consultants and private equity lobbyists. Slide 2. A leaked internal memo proposing the consolidation of the trust holdings under a new entity. One that would quietly move decision-making power away from the existing board. Slide 3. A financial projection showing a shift of liquidity toward Bradford family-controlled subsidiaries, timed conveniently to Julia and Daniel's wedding. Gasps. Murmurs. One board member dropped his pen. Douglas turned to his son. "You knew about this?" Mark's face went pale. I turned off the screen. This, I said, is no longer a family matter. It's a company matter. And it's my responsibility to act. Douglas stood abruptly. You have no right. I have every right, I said calmly. And I'm exercising it. That night, Daniel showed up at my door. He didn't knock. Just walked in like he used to when he was 10 and needed comfort. You went to the board, he said. I nodded. He sank into the armchair exhausted. She's been talking to people, he said. Investors. She wants control. She says it's our legacy. I sat down across from him. And what do you want? He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered, Did you ever think maybe you should have told me sooner? That maybe I could have helped stop this? I looked at him. Not with anger, but with the sadness of a parent who sees their child finally understand something they never wanted them to face. She's your wife, I said. I needed to know which side you were on. 2 days later, Julia called me. No fake charm. No polished lines. Just raw, controlled fury. You've made a mistake. Have I? I asked. You've humiliated my family. I gave your family a lifeline, I replied. You just didn't like that the hand holding it was mine. Silence. Then she said something I hadn't expected. I was trying to secure our future. No, I said. You were trying to take what wasn't yours. I love Daniel. Then stop trying to control him. Another pause. Then she hung up. The board met again on Friday. This time I brought a proposal. Not to fire anyone. Not to take revenge. But to restructure. Douglas would retain an honorary title, but lose decision-making power. Mark would remain but under oversight. And Julia? She would be legally barred from any corporate involvement or trust-related advisory positions for the next 5 years. It passed with a 5-2 vote. After the meeting, Douglas approached me privately. I underestimated you, he said quietly. I nodded. A lot of people do. He hesitated. Why did you keep all this hidden? I smiled. Because the loudest people in the room are usually too busy talking to listen. I was waiting for the right moment. He extended a hand. I shook it. Not out of forgiveness. Out of closure. When I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Handwritten. Just my name on the envelope. Inside a single page. I don't understand you. But I respect you. J. I placed it in the drawer with the rest of the documents. Daniel showed up 2 days later. No call. No warning. He stood in my doorway like he had 1,000 things to say and no idea where to start. Come in, I said. He stepped inside, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders tense like he was holding the weight of 2 families. We sat across from each other just like we had 100 times before. But now there was something different between us. Something raw and unspoken. Julia moved out, he said. I waited. She said she needed time. Said I should figure out whose side I'm on. I nodded. And are you? He looked up. I don't know. That was honest. Painfully so. He told me everything. How Julia had been pushing him to get more involved in my affairs. For the sake of future planning. How she'd encouraged him to ask about the trust, the company shares, even the deed to my house. She framed it like partnership, he said. Like it was about being a team. But it wasn't. Not really. I listened. I wanted to believe she was just looking out for us, he continued. But now I see it, she wasn't asking. She was positioning. He rubbed his hands together. And all that time you stayed silent. I leaned forward. Daniel, I gave you space to become your own man. I wanted you to build your life on your terms. Not mine. He looked down. I feel like I've been walking around in a house of mirrors. You weren't alone, I said. I just waited until you were ready to see it for yourself. We talked for hours. About his childhood. About his father. About the years I spent pretending to be smaller than I was so no one would feel threatened. I remember you clipping coupons, he said softly. Fixing the heater with duct tape. Making it look like we were just getting by. I smiled faintly. And all the while, you were managing millions? I nodded. And making grilled cheese. He laughed. For the first time in days. That night, Daniel stayed over. Not because he needed a place to sleep. Because he needed to remember what peace felt like. We made tea, watched a movie we'd seen 20 times, and for a little while the world felt simple again. The next morning, as he packed to leave, he paused at the door. "Are you going to cut her off completely?" he asked. I shook my head. "No." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I'm not going to punish her. I'm going to watch." "Watch what?" "How she rebuilds if she does. What she does when she thinks no one is looking." He was quiet for a long time. "I still love her," he finally said. I nodded. "I know. Even if I can't trust her right now. That's the hardest kind of love," I said. "But it's yours to carry, not mine." 2 weeks later I received a letter. From Julia. No signature. No return address. Just a folded piece of linen paper inside a plain envelope. It read, "I made a mistake. I mistook silence for weakness. And I treated respect like a transaction. I don't expect forgiveness. But I won't ask for anything more. Not anymore." I didn't respond. But I didn't tear it up either. I placed it in the same drawer where her last note had gone. Not because I believed her, but because people don't always mean what they write, but they always mean what they regret enough to write down. Later that week, Daniel called. "I got an offer," he said. "Out west. A promotion. Big move." "Are you going?" "I want to. But I'm not sure what leaving means anymore." "Leaving doesn't erase loyalty," I said. "And staying doesn't always fix what's broken." He paused. "Would you be okay if I went?" I smiled. "Daniel, you could be across the country or across the street. My love for you won't change. But you have to live your life." He was quiet. Then, "I love you, Mom." I closed my eyes. "I know. And I love you back." The day he left, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. No big speeches. No emotional goodbyes. Just a squeeze of the hand and a whispered thank you.